So we're about to commence the proceedings for today. If you'd like to take a seat. So on behalf of the IDEX legal team, I'd like to welcome you to what is now the 13th edition of the Legal Counsel Congress. As you may already know, IDEX Legal, we've been pioneering events and research for the legal community since 2010. First, we launched the Legal Counsel Congress. Then we launched our IDEX Legal Awards in 2012. We then launched a training and development division for the legal community. We recently moved into opening up a management consultancy division, which supports legal departments and law firms with challenges of running their business units and firms. And today we're excited to be launching our in-depth GC benchmarking report, which you'll hear more about later today. And I think that's probably the first time anyone's produced a report looking at some of the GC metrics that are impacting Indian departments. But I've seen the copy, and as a teaser, some of the findings you'll see later today will be quite eye-watering and also demonstrate how far the community's come over the last few years. You know, since I've seen the last 6 years, very much the conversation about being a cost function and not really fully appreciated by corporates to now many general counsel are talking about how much work they have to do, and every day it's increasing responsibilities and accountabilities. So as the legal fraternity continues to evolve, increasingly mirroring the trends we're seeing internationally, it's our continued commitment at IDEX Legal to grow with you and act as a quality provider of services that match your needs, not just for today, but over the upcoming years. And now in its 13th edition, the LCC is established as the country's premier in-house thought leadership forum. And you'll notice that unlike other events, the vast majority of those attending are senior members of the in-house community. And that's because we believe it's really important when you're inundated at work and under pressure to deliver, to actually occasionally take time out to slow down, meet friends, going through similar challenges, and think about solutions to help you manage your departments. So thank you all for again being part of the LCC. And as we always say, what you put in will impact what you get out. So ask questions and gain answers, and ensure you leave today having gained something valuable. And before I hand over to our chairman, I'd also like to say a huge thank you to our partners, without whom the LCC is not possible to host. So thank you to our presenting partner, Thomson Reuters, Gold partners, Ropes & Gray and Indus Law, Silver partners, FTI Consulting, Rajran Tan and Trilegal, our talent partner, Vahura, and our workshop partner, Eversheds. Now I'd like to begin the conference by inviting our chairman, Mr. Anand Bhushan, who you know well, onto the dais. Anand's the General Counsel Legal for the APAC region at Cognizant. He's also part of the Board of Directors for the APAC region. He's got over 13 years experience in corporate and commercial law in the global market, and before Cognizant, practiced very much as an independent consultant for companies like JRTV, Oro Food, Saugata, and FL Schmidt. He joined Cognizant in 2007 and has played a crucial role in building the legal team there, from a handful to what is probably 70+ lawyers right now. And in addition to core corporate and contracts practice for APAC, Anand also heads the in-house real estate, HR, procurement, IP, and compliance divisions. So I'd like to welcome Anand on stage. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's energized. Are we? There was a lucky crew earlier who had a special breakfast. How many? Raise your hands. How many of y'all were part of the early breakfast? All right. Only one or two? Okay. So it's a pleasure to be here. We always love to be part of the Ideas Exchange events. It's not just the fantastic delegates. I mean, everyone in the Mumbai, Delhi circuit especially, we've attended so many of these events. You see the same speakers. You see the same topics. God, if I see another seminar which says General Counsel as CEO, you know, it's time to draw a line. But where Ideas Exchange is very different is you'll see this when you interact. It's not just the quality of your speakers, your moderators. It's also the quality of your audience. And this type of quality pool of attorneys and law firm representatives, and even talent specialists like Vahura, it's a very unique blend. And that's just not it, right? There are two other events. The GC survey, we'll talk a little more about this as the evening progresses. It's a very interesting, very comprehensive survey that's coming out. And number 3, the events and the award ceremony later on in the evening, which is just the pinnacle of this event. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first topic. And hats off to the person who came up with the title. I love the way this sounds. The League of Extraordinary General Counsels. And that's not it. And the code of how to get in. And this is going to be moderated by the very, very distinguished Kenneth Tung. You can actually come up on stage so people can associate your face to the introduction as well. 3 decades, 30 years in the profession, has been partner in many leading law firms in China. But look at this. I was just reading this. I have to say, Regional General Counsel. Look at this. Kodak, Honeywell, Goodyear, and PepsiCo. Now, that's a distinguished 30 years. He's now the General Counsel at Lex Sigma, where he's an ad hoc General Counsel for leading transactions in the region. And he's also, this is the entrepreneurial side you don't see very often, has co-founded InGear Legal, oh wow, this is a tongue twister, has co-founded InGear Legal Ethics Limited. You should say that fast. But, so that's a fantastic blend of, law firm, in-house, as well as entrepreneurial experience. I'm sure it's going to be a great session. Over to you, Mr. Tung.
Thank you. Well, let's please have the panel up here rather than just me starting to talk here. Good morning, everyone. It's really an honor for me to be here. I have to admit that I cannot claim credit for the title of this panel and all the wonderful descriptions, but we will try to. Oh, thank you. Great. We will try to match up, if not, because the expectation has been set so high about the League of Extraordinary GCs, which is really in front of us right now. Anyway, instead of going through the bios, which is, I think, each of you should have, I'm going to just ask each of our panelists, maybe just across the order they arranged, to say just a few words about themselves, so you can put a persona and a face to the name, and you can find out about the rest, and then we can dive right into the topic without ado. So, Saugata.
So, I'm Saugata Chakravarthy. I've been with Siemens for about 9 years now. You can call it a homegrown person, because before that I have only worked for a law firm for 3 years, and then Siemens is my home. What I did in Siemens is basically I switched on different divisions because Siemens has got a lot of divisions. So I moved on from industrial to energy to mobility, which is rail systems, and then building technologies and automation and drives. And thereafter, after 8 years, I was the first Indian GC sitting on that. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eckert. I'm General Counsel of ZF AG. Don't know whether many of you have heard of that name. Traditionally, for over 100 years, we have been a major supplier of transmissions to high-class cars, like almost every BMW would have our transmission. And 2 years ago, we made a landmark transaction taking over TRW in the US, which makes us now the third largest automotive supplier in the world with a turnover of about 35 billion US dollars. I started my career in a law firm in Germany, took over some positions in the industry, like with the Bayer AG, the aspirin company, and Krauss-Maffei AG, a company that is active in the machine building industry, and joined ZF 4 years ago.
Good morning. I'm Nandita, Khurana. I've been a professional for almost 30 years now, and started my career as a litigator in the Supreme Court of India and then in the various courts with the opening up of India. Moved into the law firm world, where eventually I got into the corporate sector, and I've been with Michelin Tyres now for almost 9 years. Started with them in Singapore, and it's been quite a journey. Michelin Tyres, I know for some of you, Michelin is all about the Michelin-starred restaurants and the red guides and the green guides. but our primary business is tires, and we talk all kinds of tires. And I quite identify with what you're saying, Jan, because our tires are on just about every luxury car and every big bus you can think of outside of India. It's just in a nutshell, that's me.
Yeah, Deepak Jacob. I look after the legal, regulatory, and government relations functions at Star. Star is India's largest, broadcasting and media company right now. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of 21st Century Fox. Over the last 8 years, we've gone into multiple areas of business. Some of you guys would have seen the Pro Kabaddi leagues, the Indian football leagues. Those are things that we're doing which are not just pure broadcast, but we've gotten into multiple things like digital businesses also. And I think the last valuation was that Morgan Stanley did was that we're a $12.5 billion company right now, which makes it pretty much the crown jewel for 21st Century Fox globally. Currently, Star channels are available across 6 different continents: Middle East, South Asia, Europe, US, and South Africa also. So this role when I assumed this role, it was a very India-centric role, but now it's become a fairly large global role right now. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. What makes GCs so extraordinary? But that probably not the question here today. But we are probably talking about a journey, an evolution. We can call it, in various ways. Depends on how we approach the topic of where have we been, where are we coming here, and it will be you have 50 people, you have 50 different answers. In my mind, one thought I have might be, is it a similar journey as the accountants and the finance manager who become ultimately a CFO, or let's say a sales manager who actually acquire enough other skills beyond just closing deals to become to master the skill of marketing in today's highly data-driven world? Or is it also most recently a lot of what we call people who were used to be just doing payrolls, hiring, firing, and now become chief HR officers and actually in charge of engaging people, not only employees, but the whole value supply chain? I mean, is this a journey that we're often thinking about? That's would be kind of questions that I want to throw out. What is this evolutionary story? And it will be very different in different contexts, geography. Or, I'll throw in another one. Is this something about us? Because from time to time, different organizations, different bosses I report to, especially the business folks, and say, well, you're probably, in my early stage, you'll say, you're probably a good individual contributor, but how are you going to bring up your team? Yes. How are you going to actually build a function that will plug into the business strategy? So these are the various thoughts that comes across my mind, but I really want to defer to the panel. And just because you guys would be polite, I want to just ask Nandita to help kick us off. How about that?
You don't need to be sexist, starting with a lady first. But that's a lot you've covered and a lot you've asked for. And just really before we start talking, I only have my personal experience to talk about, and I think it's you can't really come up the same way just by having just by being a great lawyer. You cannot become a very good general counsel, because what does it mean to be a general counsel? Let's just go back to that basic question. And we have general counsels sitting in this room. They have a fairly decent idea of what it means and what they need to bring to the table. So before, just a quick comment. I'll jump back into the topic maybe at another point of time. But I think it is important to wear a business hat all the time. You need to partner business. You cannot be seen to be standing outside and being a naysayer. It's about the ability to be able to sit at that management table and to participate and bring some value addition. Now, this value addition has to be a very cohesive kind of a solution that you would bring to the table. It could be it has to be strategic in nature. That's just off the top of my head. Jan, would you like to?
Yeah, I agree. I think the evolution starts really with questioning the role we have been taken it over for so long. Basically, I think one of the key answers is let's stop pretending we belong to a secret circle of lawyers with knowledgeable of a secret science which we would not like to share with members of our business community in the company we're working in. I think what we should start thinking about is how we can contribute to the business success of our company, and wonder how we can contribute to this actually. It's not, your role does not really limit to providing a certain legal answer to a question you get, but you always have to see to what extent it really helps achieving the business success. And at that time, you interlink with the business organization and evolves from a purely legal consultant to a member of a business team, in which you can provide some knowledge you have gained over years through practice and through training, which is basically, in my view, how to address complex problems in a very specific way. And this is the key element we can bring into a complex organization like a global organization, a global company or group of companies, and which makes us then really a valuable member of this team.
I picked that up from the word team. And what I would like to say is, like, from a lawyer, we'd start to think as a T. When you say T, somebody in the general management told me, you are a vertical and you're thinking as a lawyer. When you are at the top, you're thinking as that T. And then that brings up the word team, and that's exactly what the general counsel's role would be, to look into the variety of the complex issues and simplify it and put it to the management. And that's what is the value add, I would say. Now, how would you simplify? That's a big question. The question comes across like any representative as a solicitor, you would represent any client, and the way you try and understand and simplify and solicit for the benefit and the judgment which you are looking for, that's exactly what you need to do for your own company. And when you start doing that, automatically coming back, Nandita, the value add will come on the table. The question is it enough that as a general counsel, as an individual, you do that? Or is it more important that your entire team works towards that goal? And the question then comes across, how do you start doing it? It's more of an influence character as a general management, and not a character as coming across and saying that this is what a lawyer says. It's like being a sailor on the boat and sail it through. When an opinion comes from an external counsel, and I'm going for specific examples, when an opinion comes from an external counsel, what do you do with that? The external counsel might not understand, and that's the end of that. But as an in-house lawyer, you will have to look into it and put it through as it matches your own industry. And when you are there, understanding your own industry, the behavior of the business and the need of the business comes into the picture. So that takes automatically out the role of a lawyer and brings you as a business manager. So the ability to shift from a business manager to a lawyer, and lawyer to an accountant, and an accountant to a finance guy is the match which you have to always keep on playing. And that exactly makes the difference. And that's exactly what we need to percolate to our team.
Yeah, so actually I like the way Jan started on the secret society, and the fact that we shouldn't look at ourselves as a secret group, because when you do that, then you kind of isolate yourselves from the business, and that's a good point. But I just want to take off on the point that you made in terms of what's the journey and what's the process of evolution from being an in-house counsel to a GC. And I think the journey is it's it's a multi-stage process, really. When you come in as an in-house counsel, your first instinct is to be a lawyer. So that doesn't change. That's part of your DNA. So can you be a sales guy? Can you kind of wear the sales hat? Can you wear the business development hat? I don't think so. I think when you come in, your first role is risk mitigation. That's really what you kind of try and do at every step of the way. And as you start understanding the business better, as you start understanding, what makes the needle move, you move into a more evolved role of an enabler. And once you start understanding that through enabling, now enabling, it could be through transaction orientation, enabling litigation, regulatory affairs, then you move into a more advocacy role, where the inputs are more strategic, they're more tactical, they have a business objective. It's either opening up a new revenue line, it's opening up new markets, it's about creating new intellectual property rights for the organization. And I think if I were to describe the journey, I think that's really, in pure legal terms, it's a risk mitigation, it's enabler, you become an advocate. And then I think you earn your seat at the table. When you have all these three elements, nicely integrated, is when you earn your table seat. But just to pick up from what Saugata said, through this journey, it's important that you change the vocabulary. The vocabulary that you use has to evolve as you go through these stages. It's the secret society. You need to kind of bust the secret society myth. You need to bust the fact that we deal with laws that you don't understand. So the vocabulary has to change along that process of evolution. That then builds perception in your favor. That kind of makes you relevant at the table. And when you therefore start contributing, people recognize that contribution. So that's the journey evolution, and ultimately you're wearing multiple hats. It's about balancing all those hats.
This is actually such a, I think, important topic that I thought maybe I want to take the liberty of asking us to invest a couple more minutes into this. Saugata, you talked about essentially, I think I've seen it really in the community of thoughts have been expressed. The term is, one of the term raised is the T-shaped lawyer, which is essentially based on, I think, DuPont or IBM's talking about the T-shaped professional. So you need to have depth in your field, but you also need to be able to interact with the rest of the organization and add more value that way. I think that really sound very relevant to me and very important. Not to play around with words, but in the world of technology that we have to live in, and software is eating every businesses, and some would claim that, well, the legal profession is an exception. So these are the exceptionalists who would make that claim. But the other side would say, no, that wouldn't make any difference. And I know I don't have, I'm not trained. I have some training in Six Sigma, and I'm not a black belt. But I did work on process and projects. I'm not trained certainly in writing code. I'm not trained enough in statistics and data analysis, even though I do have courses before, and I did look into lens during all these years working with business people. But I think I'm ready, more than ready, to work with people, and I know what I don't have, to bring them into. And some people say lawyers should also bring in, law firms should bring in non-lawyers. In-house departments, many of them are already bringing in non-lawyers. That's probably nothing new anymore. But for the junior lawyers who are still trained in many law schools today, I'm not entirely sure. There are very few law schools in North America. I know some who are really trained in all these areas, and analytics, data, and everything, who help people to really prioritize what we have so many things to do. Some of them could be looked at as busy work, but it's not, because if we don't do it, something will happen. But then we have to look at how many of these are repeatable, how many of these are mission critical, how many of these we should let go and let it move along the spectrum to a bit more of a commodity type of work. So do we see our organizations, talking about not just as individual contributors? Do we see our organizations, how likely, how much pushback, how difficult are we going to drag all of us into this, or maybe this is not the right way to approach it either. We should just do what we're good at doing, what we're trained to do, and then try to see what the business people want us to, the role that they will assign to us.
I will put it like this. Primarily, technology should be an enabler. It cannot be the end of it. And data analytics world is a completely different world altogether. And I deliberately tell that it's a different world altogether because primarily there is a lot of data floating around. We every day do contracts. The question is, first we need to lift that and see how many of them are type of a repeat and can be done by the robo-lawyer. And that's the new concept which is coming across. When you talk about the robo-lawyer, it's good to have a repeat nature and repeat and standard formats. And then you can play around with that. But I am a little traditional on that one, saying that when it comes to analytics, when that slips up to analytics, it is more the brain and the intellect and the situation and the circumstance which plays. And that I don't know as of date, and I don't want to comment on that, whether that will be replaced by artificial intelligence or not. The question thereafter comes, how much on a daily basis we use this. There are a lot of tools, techniques which are already in place, which are very handy. Some legal compliance tools have come around and it's floating and lots of companies are using those. There are drafting tools and techniques people are using, making use of it. When it comes to the young guys, young generation, it is apparent and it is not going to work without the tools. But how much is still a matter of a balance of a pendulum. So that's one part of it. The second topic here is how much can you do as general counsel or as a team as a lawyer? When you put a product out, what is the content is ultimately is your own product. And that has to be still analyzed and taken forward. So can we replace that? That's also a question. So I leave it on the other members to add to it.
So I can take off from there. Let me address 2 points. I think you asked 2 questions. One is that how's technology changing our lives? That's one. And what is the role of data and analytics in the legal function? Technology is today become the biggest disruptor of businesses. The shelf life of a product which was 5 years earlier is now crunched to 1 year. A service that was a unique service a year ago is almost, it has been replicated and copied 10 times over. So I think shelf life and survivability, technology has guaranteed that you're not going to survive until you stay ahead of the game. So it's the big disruptor. How does it play out in our lives? If it's just like any other function. If you don't embrace technology, and if you don't use it to create a more efficient system or process, you're going to be left behind. So let me give you examples. And in our industry, our products are going online or on television, on air, every 5 to 10 minutes. So it's a 24/7 run. There is no 6-month time period or anything. It's a non-stop business, right? So the standards and practices team, which kind of reviews all the content before it goes on television or before it goes into the digital world, they're on the job 24/7. And so in the early days, the episodes, the movies, etc., would be given to them in CDs. So they would kind of load the CD and then review the whole thing. And then we decided that that's not going to work. It's just too tedious because, we need those CDs at least 7 days before the program goes on air, which doesn't. So we've created a content live platform, which basically allows any of the team members to access that content from any remote location, including, their homes or wherever it is. It's just made their lives so much easier. They can sit on a Saturday and Sunday and work from home and review all the content, clear it, and send it up for air. So I think that's one use of technology. I think the other use is about using technology to track, to define success parameters and to track success, whether it's litigation, whether it's, contractual, transaction, regulatory. I think you can use, Saugata mentioned a lot of these legal automation tools, and I think it's required. But for an industry like ours, digital rights management is the big value creator. It basically takes all the company's assets and puts it into a database, and you can get dashboards of information relating to what asset creation has happened, what monetization of that asset, where's the revenue leakage happening. So those are two examples of technology. Let me just move on to the data analytics piece. We were never trained, like you said. I mean, I don't know about today's generation of lawyers. The kind of courses that they do have fundamentally changed, but we were never trained in that. So there is no DNA that comes with it. But I think you can use data and analytics on two sides of the fence. One is to achieve certain business objectives. So there's a business problem. You don't have sufficient data, and that's half the time in-house counsels are struggling with information and data that's not coming in from the business units. So they have to make sound judgments and decisions based on insufficient data. So you have to be able to have a team of lawyers that kind of are able to lead generate their own information, their own data, and help somebody maybe with the numbers to crunch it. That's one. That's to solve a business problem. The other is, again, an in-house, an efficiency problem. Litigation management is about taking vast amounts of data, again, splicing and dicing it, and finding the most efficacious path that you want to go down. You can identify patterns. So, for example, I look at if there's an increasing number of litigations, in my view, that's an indicator of the health of the organization also. Right? It's a barometer that you can use to determine that, hey, something's wrong. Now, where is it going wrong? Is it in the contract process? Is it in the negotiating process? Is it a behavioral problem? So these are basic, analytics. So I don't think it's become very much part of our lives. I don't think you can.
I agree. I think one of the terms that part of this journey perhaps could be moving from we call anecdata to bigger data, but that's just one of the many factors sweeping through.
But I think really in our sector, this is the manufacturing sector, there's a lot of data that's floating around that is being used by industry specifically or in the business aspect, like you mentioned. It's essential there. But in our field, is it really required? And that's a decision we need to take depending on which industry you're coming from. So for instance, in ours, Michelin does have its guides online. And this is something that was essential because we have to reach out to a much wider audience. We needed that audience. But in the manufacturing sector, for the legal department as a whole, I really think it's about, like as Saugata said, it's just pick and choose the tools that enable you to do your job better. So for instance, in a country like India, we really feel the need for, since it's regulation heavy, we find that having a compliance tool in place really, really works efficiently for the lawyers. So they are aware, and it ensures that management has bought into the entire process. So that's where we are using the dashboards to be able to get our people to buy in. And when we do this analysis with the other part of the world that I look after, which is Africa and Middle East, we find that it's not, other than South Africa, it's all right not to use such a tool. So you really need to be specific about what tools you're using, in which part of the world you're using it. And Jan, you're a global counsel, so I do not know what your experience has been.
I agree with all aspects that were mentioned, but at the end of the day, we're not using technology because we like fancy dashboards. An investment that needs to be made can only be justified if you, as a general counsel, can show to the board that it will help you working more efficient, and at the end of the day, save more costs. That's my view. That is, I think, the main driver, or one of the main drivers, certainly. And just to mention a very simple example, many of you will recall how we, a few years ago, how we organized due diligence processes, with large teams traveling around the world, sitting for days in boring data rooms. So it's obvious how that has changed, and I think one of the reasons, as I say, is because you work more efficient and cost saving now. but using technology. And this will be the driver in the future as well.
So I'm going to take this opportunity to quote-unquote pivot, an overly used term, on, there's a very trite saying to say, well, what doesn't get measured doesn't get to be improved or changed, or if you don't measure a problem, you can't solve the problem. And in this journey, or this evolution that we're going through, this is one of our favorite topics, do we measure? How do we measure our contributions, and how do we measure the world is changing, and it's changing faster, whether in actually really most industries, that some industries that we've seen really haven't changed fundamentally for decades, like the auto industry. It's going through all kinds of stuff, whether it's self-driving, as you well known, or electrification or sharing. These are all changes. But how do, and back to our function, the legal function, we are always asked, and it's not just we, I think it's just a practical question. Everybody else, whether it's corporation or your relationship with your client and your supply chain, what have you done for me lately? How do we measure that?
So I'll start with that. I think I don't think anyone has any right answers, and there aren't any right answers in this particular area. But I divide it into two parts. One is that there are the business lawyers who are attached to the operational units, the verticals of various verticals of business, and then there are the pure corporate functions. I think it's very difficult for the corporate functions to kind of create metrics around success, except deal closure, timelines, success in litigation, etc. But I think for the business lawyers, I use the same metrics as the business uses. So it's market share, profitability, EBITDA, costs. And so the business lawyers don't use any different metrics. It makes life a lot easier. They understand their contribution, whether it's directly or indirect, and they have an end objective. And what we try and do is to create a connect in their key responsibility areas with those specific business metrics. To say, if there is a profitability target of, say, 600 crores or $600 million or whatever it is, what are they going to do? What are the 2 or 3 strategic or the 2 or 3 tactical things that they're going to do to achieve that metric, to help the business achieve that metric? That's the enabler role, If it's a regulatory function, it's an advocacy role. So what are those 2 or 3 key markets you're going to open up? What are those 2 or 3 key revenue lines? So for example, we are regulated by the TRAI, and the TRAI has been, for the last 10 years, regulating the pricing of our channels at the wholesale level. So how do you kind of deregulate the pricing? How do you kind of create new avenues of revenue? So those are the metrics you could start creating, which are very business-centric metrics. And then there are the traditional, corporate functional metrics, which, are around timelines and deliverables, efficiency, and all those things,
I would put it in a conceptual discussion rather. Give you an instance. This is a typical value-add question when you start discussing with your CFO, and the CFO asks you a question, what's the value add of the legal department? I cynically put it down, since you're sitting here safe and sound, that's the value add of the legal department. Because we have lots of regulations under companies law which can be detrimental. And that's a cynical one. Then the discussion can roll across in 4 different pillars. And the conceptual discussion is, you're talking about intangible or a developmental part of it. Then we can talk about real cost savings, which is very difficult to measure in terms of the books of accounts. But then the third vertical, which you can think of, is actually how much is that add to the bottom line of the company. And that's exactly what I use, basically. Since I have 3 different functions to cater to, and as you said, the corporate business laws, we do a regulation check, and if you are at the highest level of compliance of regulations, it is actually a cost saving.
Right.
And then my colleagues who are in the contracts and claims management, if they are earning claims and defending claims. That's hardcore hit to the bottom line. So this is the second one. And the third one is how much learning and development and change of culture comes across in the business units for the project management and the development of the business. So this is the conceptual discussion which we can start out with. And thereafter, I don't think so, and I haven't personally encountered a discussion which comes across to the elements of whether you did 20 contracts or 30 contracts, or whether this contract has this clause or that clause and things like that. Because that's the conceptually agreed system which we will go ahead with. And that's my experience, and I can only share that.
I think it's really a delicate question, because at the end of the day, it's a question how we justify our existence. In Europe, but for sure in the US even more so, the risks of board members to be sued, to be held personally liable, is extremely high, and has been growing over the past few years. And that has changed, at least in these regions, the role of a general counsel very much, because we are considered kind of as an insurance. Yeah? And the costs that need to be paid for the legal department invested is seen as kind of insurance premium. And as long as you can show as a top executive that you have asked a knowledgeable general counsel and he has given you some advice, and even if the advice has to be proved to be wrong at the end of the day, you still cannot be held liable. So I think this is a very important aspect. And so I don't think it's easy to define KPIs for the success of the legal department. But if you keep in mind how in this situation that I just described, board members look at general counsel, then I think the question comes down to the perception. How are you perceived to deliver your services to the management, and how does he feel taken care of? If the perception is good, I think then you are considered a good legal department, good general counsel. So at that time, perception becomes reality. But let me just give you one quick example how legal teams have also managed to develop new business models. The legal department of Deutsche Bundesbahn, which is the railway organization in Germany, has started to sue members of cartels which have found guilty by the EU Commission, for example, and through that, over the years, have recovered basically hundreds of millions for Deutsche Bundesbahn, a business model, if you want, that nobody had pursued before, and that now more companies take over, and through that contribute to the results of its employer. So these are ways, if you look into possibilities and be creative, where you can actually add money, cash, to the success of the company as well.
I'd like to add to that, Jan, because we do something similar when we talk about adding to the bottom line, because not all of us are fortunate to be in an industry like yours, Deepak, where it's easy to measure KPIs. But for most of us, it's
not easy. It's a hit.
Yeah, but it's
a
more
problem. But I'm just saying
right?
it's about,
yeah. So I think what we've done globally is we actually go out and look for opportunities. I mean, we as in the lawyers. And there's a lot of money always left on the table.
That's right.
In every contract, in every transaction.
That's right.
So what we do then at that point of time is go identify those opportunities as the lawyers in charge, and then move it into litigation or negotiations or whatever is required. So that's one aspect of it, and that's actual money in. We've actually brought in millions of dollars across. I mean, even in a country like India, we've managed to pull in something like about 20 million. And in the Middle East, again, we've managed to pull in another few million. The other aspect is actually saving regulatory costs by being agile. And that's a very easy one to do. So when you're actually hit with something by whichever department you take it, any regulator, you know, if you really go and defend your company well, that's another cost that you can attribute to yourself, you know, cost saved to yourself. So that's another way of measuring it. Another thing that we normally do is what we've done is also defined processes. We sit on the risk, you know, we do a risk process, a risk management process, whereby risks globally are defined. I mean, country-wise, country-specific risks are defined, and the lawyers tend to be very much part of it. So when you've identified, you've already, the most of the risks, what you've done is taken care of 80% of the problems that the company is going to face. And that's another visible one, because if there's nothing that has happened in that annual year, I mean, it's an easy one. That's an easy win. Beyond that, the question will still get asked.
Before we move on, this discussion triggered a couple of brainwaves that I have. And one of them, I think, Jan, you used the word, actually, insurance and premium. And I'm not going to make a long story about that. I did, you know, many years ago back in Kodak, if you remember that company. I did stand in front of a group of legal managers and say, well, aren't what we do sort of an analog version of an insurance policy? And some looked at me blank, some look at me and say, what's wrong with this person? But anyway, the point there is today, for example, I'm aware that AIG is setting up in January, they set up a company we touched on, I call Legal Operations Company. What is AIG doing in that space? Somebody say, well, it's mostly about managing law firms' rates and arbitrage, and maybe to even sell some law workflow overflow type of insurance. But I actually think, I would like to think that they are actually using some data in some industry, not across all, to really start pricing risks. And this is a part I like. Opportunity, risk opportunity arbitrage. And my argument is I don't think we should be limited to, because it goes hand in hand. Another quick point I would like to mention is I think there is a movement. The businesses always are very much focused and confined to financial statements. I think a lot of what we do, we're looked to as to look upon a little bit around the corner, slightly longer term. You know, that's what some kind of discussion about Counsel. But then how do we deal with this quarterly, monthly, this financial statement confines? One of the movement, which is probably not yet very popular yet, but there are movements out there to say, well, corporation, I'm not going to go into the CSR side, but say you should actually look at a whole range. Financial and asset management is only two out of the many. You have to manage your social capital, you have to manage your natural capital, especially for those that deals with nature, and intellectual capital, which is not just IP, but intellectual capital of your whole supply chain, how do you manage it, and of course human capital. So these are the things that most companies will say, well, fine, no, I don't have to do it, I'll think about that. But that's actually dovetail into what we do part of the time. So how do we can advocate that? But I think that I'm just raising things that is not there, but I think we should push for. Let me jump out. I think we're reminded, and we started a bit late, we should push out to the next topic. How do you measure what we do with our, what I call supply chain? Today it's mostly law firms. Tomorrow maybe not just law firms, but we work with mostly law firms. So if I may ask, you know, do we rely on them completely, and then they are our insurance? Now that globally there is a revolt on the law firm business model, traditional, especially Western law firm business models, are we part of that revolt, or we just push them and beat them up and say that's all the risks are yours in the so-called AFA discussions? Or how do we manage that, or we actually go look for an insurance company to help us do things and look for some robo-lawyers?
So I think we're part of that revolt, I think, very clearly. It's not a sustainable model. I mean, you know, the hourly billing thing is not going to, I think it's reached its threshold and ceiling in many parts of the world. And I think, you know, invoicing and billing is one element of, you know, how we see, you know, how you know, the value add that a law firm can do. We need to change that model. We need to probably find a mix of maybe, you know, case-to-case fixed fee, or the billing rates have to come down, or the law firms have to kind of really up the ante on what kind of value they start delivering. If it's going to be just pure legal advice, I'll send you the opinion and then I'll say goodbye to you until next month and the next transaction, it's not going to work. I think organizations are willing to pay when they see the lawyer in the law firm becoming more a partner in the business. He's staying engaged. He's not in and out, in and out. No, he's engaged with the business. He's sitting and talking to not just the in-house counsels, but he's also engaging with the business folks. Again, he's changed his vocabulary. He's changed the way he perceives it's not just a client, attorney, relationship. He's pretty much integrated with the organization. That's when I see organizations are willing to extend and kind of, pay a lot higher for that value. That's one. But I also think that, law firms also bring in that independent perspective, which is what we all rely on. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we make what we think is sound business decisions, but ultimately you want that kind of endorsed, by that independent thinking law firm. And the world is changing there. They are looking, again, organizations are looking for very specific expertise. It's automobiles, they're looking for lawyers with a very deep understanding of the automobile industry. If it's engineering and infrastructure, they're looking for people. So I think the day of the generalist, the day of the M&A guy coming in on a transaction, he has limited value add. He's the deal guy. He goes out of your life and you're willing to pay him for that transaction. After that, you're saying, well, I don't have much to give him. But I think the day of the specialist lawyer, the guy who's gone in and understood that industry in depth and is therefore able to, speak the same language as you and your business folks, I think we're willing to go the extra mile to kind of engage and pay him better.
I fully share this approach. I think the one-stop solution is not the right one when you work with a firm, and also the hire and fire mentality is probably not the one that proves to be most successful. What we are currently doing is trying to build a global panel with a limited number of law firms that give advice to us, where we exactly try to find the right lawyers with the right knowledge in our industry, in the regions with whom we want to work with, and also then over time become a really strategic partner with an emotional attachment to the company, to the business, taking over responsibility for what you ask him, and that I think is the right way to approach this.
I'm with you, Jan, on that one, because keeping lawyers are in-house as well and outside as well. Now, why do you need these special niche people? Because your transaction and the way you are working might require a little bit more view from outside. Or you completely do not have that expertise inside and then you need that.
Right.
The question is, when do you and how do you take it? As a matter of scopes and how you get into it. And I agree completely with Jan. It's exactly that, whether it's an insurance or whether it's a partnership which will be built on. I personally feel that it's an extension of the in-house department outside. And when I mean that as a statement, that means exactly what Jacob, you said on the partnership, the building of the partnership, and it's a long-term relationship. It cannot be a short-term one. You do not understand a company by just one transaction. You understand only one or two people on that transaction, and that might be completely different. Yeah. And that sort of a partnership is required, and I think most of the law firms are coming up with that sort of a partnership for that type.
Can I just add that one, just one statement is that, earlier earlier in-house counsels or the organizations used to kind of chase the brand name of a firm, and I don't mean any disrespect to any of the brand names of the firms, but frankly, I think people have begun to see that, it's not firms that make lawyers, it's lawyers that make firms.
Exactly.
And therefore, people are hunting for that one lawyer in that one firm, and they're willing to engage with that firm because of that lawyer. It's become super critical for the organization to have him on board. So he will, in case he jumps ship to another firm, they kind of follow him, And that's what I've seen and, happening.
I have to agree. This is an alliance that we are looking at, and a cost-conscious law firm is always welcome. I mean, that's the name of the game. And yes, strategic partners who understand local needs. I think that's another one that a lot of them miss. They're so busy pushing their agenda onto you that they forget who you are and what your needs are, and they're just very, they're just too objective in their approach very often. And I think that's all set to change now. Because we are all looking now at empowering our own teams. We have good lawyers in-house. So why shouldn't we empower our teams? And that's one way that they become true partners.
And I think if once you've built such a relationship, also the risk of being overcharged, for example, you just mentioned the cost, is becoming significantly lower. Yeah? When you enter into a long-term relationship, you from both sides should be prepared to adjust, for example, certain rates that have been agreed, or I would never stick to a cap when it becomes obvious that the basis for the negotiation of the cap has been completely different from what the transaction turned to be out over time. Yeah? I'm always open to rediscussions, but I also expect from an external lawyer, from an external lawyer, to be open to discussions if he, for example, billed time that didn't really create additional value to the company.
And let me just add on to this, because I think we're beating up law firms for no rhyme or reason, frankly, and I think it's not fair. But if I were to just kind of step on the other side of the fence and be a law firm lawyer, having had the benefit of being in litigation in a law firm and an in-house practice, if I were to step back and say, I think the law firm, the senior law firm lawyers need to start looking at the client from, a share of wallet. How much of the share of wallet do I have of that client? If I've been doing mergers and acquisitions for that client, but the client's got 5 other business verticals, which are being serviced by 10 other firms, why haven't I been able to kind of, engage deeply with the organization to try and capture a larger share of that pie? And I think the M&A lawyer will come and do the M&A transaction and he will go away. And then there is no engagement from anybody else. And then there are some little, ad hoc meetings that are there, which is not, which just doesn't cut ice beyond a point. So I think if I were to sit on the other side of the fence today, that's the way I'd look at it, that I need to get X percentage of the share of wallet of that client, which means I will engage on multiple fronts and,
Unfortunately, I think we have been given the
red
sign to help them to catch up on the day here. So I think we should continue with this dialogue. It's a broad one, and apologize to the audience. Also, we didn't get a chance to have an exchange here, but I think we will be here for most of the day. So let's continue this dialogue
All right.
offline.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.